In 1954, Judy Garland made the film of her life. Critics called it one of the greatest performances ever put on screen. Then, just 5 weeks later, the studio quietly took it back. They cut it apart in a room in Burbank, threw the pieces away, and never kept a full copy. For decades, fans knew something was missing. They just didn't know where it went. A soundtrack proved the scenes once existed. The screen showed nothing. What was cut, why it vanished, and whether it's still out there somewhere is a mystery people have chased for over 70 years. 196 minutes. A Star is Born was meant to bring Judy Garland back. By 1950, MGM had released her after roughly 15 years and more than 30 films. The same industry that had once treated her as one of its brightest stars had started calling her unreliable. Many people believed her best years were already behind her. Her husband, Sid Luft, did not accept that. He produced A Star is Born to prove that Judy Garland still had the power to carry a major picture. Around her, the studio built something serious. George Cukor came in to direct his first musical and his first color film. Moss Hart wrote the screenplay. Harold Arlen and Ira Gershwin wrote the songs. On paper, it sounded like a grand comeback. During production, it became a disaster of spending. The biggest waste of money had nothing to do with Garland. Warner Brothers began filming in a standard screen ratio, then changed its mind partway through and moved the picture to CinemaScope. That meant the footage already shot had to be thrown away and filmed again in the wider format. Before the final film even existed, the studio had already burned through a huge amount of money. Cukor added to the cost in his own way. He wanted choices in the editing room, so he printed as many takes as he could. A surviving reel of alternate takes for The Man That Got Away, the film's signature number, runs for about 22 minutes. It uses 2 different costumes and 2 different camera setups for one song. As the weeks passed, the schedule stretched. A film that was supposed to be large but manageable ended up taking most of a year to shoot. The budget climbed past $5 million, an enormous amount for 1954 and roughly double what a major musical was expected to cost. Some of that delay came from Garland. She was sick. She was exhausted. She was carrying the whole comeback story on her shoulders. And some days, she simply could not work. That part is documented. Still, the full picture matters. Later, the studio leaned heavily on blaming Garland. Yet the largest single waste came from the CinemaScope reshoot. That decision came from the executives, not from the star. Then came one more late addition that would matter deeply later. The long Born in a Trunk sequence, a 15-minute musical autobiography of Esther's childhood in vaudeville, was not part of Cukor's original plan. It was developed and filmed after Cukor had already finished, mostly because the studio wanted it. That choice became the cruelest irony in the whole story. The studio added roughly a quarter of an hour without the director. Later, when the film was judged too long, the studio kept that addition and cut the material Cukor and Garland had shaped with care. When Cukor and editor Fulmer Blankstead put together the first assembly, Patrick McGilligan's 1991 biography of Cukor says it ran 196 minutes, 3 hours and 16 minutes. Only test audiences saw that version. Even at that stage, some material had already been added without Cukor's input, which means the studio had started reaching into the film before it was truly finished. The team then brought it down. By the time the film was ready for the public, it stood at 181 minutes. That is the version at the heart of this story. That is also the version that no longer exists. September 29, 1954. The premiere took place at the Pantages Theater in Hollywood. and the night felt enormous. Hollywood treated it as the biggest event of the year because the film carried more than a story on screen. It carried Judy Garland's life with it. She had once been the most valuable young performer in America. Then she became a risk. Then she became someone studios no longer wanted to hire. Now she was 32, 4 years away from MGM, married to a producer who had staked everything on her, and standing inside the most demanding role of her career. The reaction was huge. Garland's reviews went beyond praise. Time magazine called her performance just about the greatest one-woman show in movie history. She had done what she said she could do. That is what makes everything that followed so painful. The long version was working. At 181 minutes, during its first engagements, A Star is Born was performing strongly. People were buying tickets to a 3-hour film. Then they were telling other people to see it. The studio soon acted as though the running time had created a crisis, yet the box office had not proved that crisis existed. Then came a second screening the day after the premiere. Something in that room changed the film's fate. 2 scenes were removed almost at once, around 15 minutes in total. One was the musical number When My Sugar Walks Down the Street, which sat inside the long Born in a Trunk sequence after Garland's version of I'll Get By. The other was a quiet scene where Vicky and Norman have a picnic on a beach. Today, almost all that remains of either scene comes from production stills and promotional ads. After that, the exhibitors stepped in. A 3-hour film created a simple problem for theaters. A shorter film allowed more showings each day. More showings meant more tickets from the same seats. With 181 minutes, plus intermission and trailers, a theater could manage 3 shows a day. A cut closer to 2.5 hours opened room for 4. That was the argument. A 4th daily screening. The distributors and theater owners took that case to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers listened. The telegram that was never answered. On October 22, 1954, the New York Times reported that A Star is Born would be pulled from theaters, cut again, and released once more. The plan removed around 27 minutes and brought the film down to 154 minutes. That shorter version went out on November the 1st. Every print already shipped was recalled and physically cut. George Cukor was not asked for guidance because he was out of the country. From this point, the story becomes more than a business mistake. It begins to feel like vandalism because of what happened in the cutting room. The editor assigned to make the cuts felt uneasy about what he had been told to remove. He tried to reach Cukor directly and sent him a telegram. No answer came back, so the cutting went ahead. Employees follow orders, and over a few weeks in Burbank, a 181-minute film that had nearly broken the people who made it was taken apart. Nobody kept a complete print of the original. That failure carries the whole tragedy. The footage did not vanish slowly in a hot vault after decades of neglect. Warner Brothers cut its own film in 1954 and made no proper effort to preserve the material it removed. The studio also failed to set aside even one full copy of the version that had premiered only a month earlier to strong reviews. By accident, the audio survived. Sound elements were stored separately in the sound department's own facility, so they escaped the same fate. Because of that accident, people could later hear scenes from A Star is Born that they could no longer see. For the next 29 years, that was the strange reality of the film. The soundtrack album included 2 songs that no longer appeared in the movie. People bought the record, heard Here's What I'm Here For and Lose That Long Face, then went to the cinema and found both songs missing from the screen. Warner Brothers offered no clear explanation. There was no public note that explained the cuts. There was no warning on the album's sleeve. Yet, the proof of a longer version sat openly in record shops the whole time. For 29 years, Judy Garland fans knew the film had been cut. They just did not know where the missing pieces had gone, what they actually threw away. The missing material was far more important than simple trimming. Here's What I'm Here For was a recording session number. More importantly, the scene where Norman Maine proposes marriage to Esther comes directly out of it. That means the song sits at the hinge of the entire love story. Lose That Long Face carried even more weight. It was a large production number, yet its real power came from where Cooker placed it. Esther performs forced cheerfulness on a soundstage, dressed as a smiling newsboy, singing about refusing to be sad. Then she walks off the set and breaks down in her dressing room over what is happening to her husband. The meaning depends on that movement from performance to collapse. The machine around her demands a smile, and that demand is crushing her. Once the number disappears, the collapse loses its shape. What remains is a woman crying in a dressing room without the full emotional build that made the scene land. That is what Warner Brothers decided the audience did not have time to see. The Trinidad coconut oil shampoo commercial also disappeared. It was a comic sequence and the third full musical number removed from the film. Then came the scenes without songs. Those cuts hit the quiet material hardest. The studio treated these scenes as talky, yet those were the scenes where Vicky and Norman's relationship actually grew. Cooker had built that relationship across the first half of the film with careful, lived-in detail. Once those moments were stripped away, the story changed. Vicky became famous. Norman fell apart. The emotional bond between them became harder to feel because so much of its foundation had been removed. Cooker's verdict has become the most repeated line in this whole affair. He called the final release a totally fragmented picture. Then he said, "Neither Judy Garland nor I could ever bear to see the final version." After that, he vowed never to watch the film again. The commercial logic also failed. The 154-minute version went out on November 1st, and the box office dropped sharply. Warner Brothers had cut 27 minutes out of a successful film to sell more tickets, then sold fewer. In the end, the film lost money. March 30th, 1955. The Academy Award nominations still came. A Star is Born received 6 nominations. Judy Garland was nominated for Best Actress. James Mason was nominated for Best Actor. The film also received nominations for Art Direction, Costume Design, Musical Score, and Best Original Song for The Man That Got Away. Almost everyone expected Garland to win. She could not attend the ceremony because she had just given birth to her third child, Joey Luft. So NBC created one of the strangest Oscar images in history, even though no footage of it survives. The network sent a full camera crew into Garland's hospital room. They ran cables through the ward and set up lights so she could give her acceptance speech live from bed and speak to Bob Hope. Then William Holden opened the envelope. He read Grace Kelly's name for the country girl. The crew packed up and left almost immediately. Garland later told the story as a bitter joke for the rest of her life. Technicians pulled cables out of the wall around a woman who had just given birth because she had stopped being useful to the broadcast. She reportedly lost by 6 votes. Her private reaction was even sadder. She said, "I knew I wouldn't get it. They wouldn't give it to me," even though she believed she deserved it. Friends said the loss cut deeply because Garland had wanted more than another award tied to music. She wanted recognition as a dramatic actress. She called her newborn son her private Academy Award. Groucho Marx sent her a telegram that outlived every speech from that night. He wrote, "This is the biggest robbery since Brinks. A Star is Born went 0 for 6. It did not win a single award. James Mason lost Best Actor to Marlon Brando for On the Waterfront, a result few people have argued against. The Best Actress field was also extraordinary. Dorothy Dandridge was nominated for Carmen Jones, becoming the first Black woman ever nominated in the category. Jane Wyman was nominated for Magnificent Obsession. Audrey Hepburn was nominated for Sabrina. Grace Kelly won for The Country Girl. Theories about Kelly's win have continued for decades. Some believe Paramount, which made The Country Girl, and MGM, Kelly's home studio, combined their voting strength. Others think an industry losing audiences to television wanted to crown a glamorous newcomer instead of rewarding a veteran still carrying a difficult reputation. Some point to Warner Brothers and its weak relationship with the Academy. The man who went looking for 28 years. That was where the story seemed to end. The longer version of A Star is Born lived mostly as a rumor. Judy Garland died in 1969 without ever seeing it restored. George Cukor refused to watch the broken version that remained. The film had been cut, damaged, and pushed into history in a form neither of them had truly made. By 1982, one man decided the story deserved another ending. His name was Ronald Haver. Haver was the film curator at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. He was a historian, not a studio boss, and that mattered because he understood how studio storage actually worked. He knew that films did not always disappear cleanly. Cans were moved, labels were changed, records were incomplete. Sometimes, the thing everyone believed was gone had simply been placed in the wrong room and forgotten. With that hope, Haver got approval from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to begin a serious search. The museum gave him a 6-month leave of absence. Warner Brothers chairman Richard Daley gave $30,000 to the project. After that, Haver began the slow work. There was nothing glamorous about it. Over the next several months, he crawled through underground vaults and storage buildings on his hands and knees. He opened film cans. He read old labels. He checked music cue sheets against scripts. He searched for anything that had been mislabeled, misfiled, or left behind in 1954 by people who had no idea that those pieces would one day matter so much. The search was almost impossible from the start. Haver was not looking for one neat copy of a movie. He was looking for scattered cans of nitrate and safety stock across several facilities. These materials had moved through 3 decades of corporate changes, storage shifts, and careless record-keeping. Some cans had names that meant nothing. Others carried labels that could no longer be trusted. Still, Haver had a few powerful clues. He had a script. He had music cue sheets. Most important of all, he had a complete soundtrack. That meant he knew what each missing scene should sound like, where it belonged, and how long it should run. The sound gave him a map, even when the picture was still lost. Every official account said the missing material had been destroyed in 1954. Haver kept looking anyway. The first major breakthrough came in the Warner Brothers Sound Department storage facility. That detail matters. This was a building meant for audio elements, so picture footage should not have been there. Yet inside that place, Haver found moving images from the film. The first important recovery was the scene where Norman proposes to Esther. After that, more pieces began to surface. The 2 missing musical numbers came back in stages. Other dramatic fragments followed. Some discoveries came from even stranger places. Parts of the missing material were reportedly rescued from the collection of a notorious film bootlegger. In other words, a private collector had kept film elements that the copyright owner had once treated as disposable. That single fact proved something painful and hopeful at the same time. Warner Brothers believed the footage had been destroyed, yet pieces of it had survived in someone else's hands. At the same time, the Burbank Sound Archive gave Haver another gift. The complete original soundtrack was still there, fully intact, in 4-track stereo. That changed everything. Haver now had all of the audio and most of the picture. Yet some scenes were still missing. The film could be heard, but parts of it could no longer be seen. So, Haver and production designer Gene Allen created a solution that became historic. They took Cukor's own production stills, tinted them, photographed them again, and cut them to the surviving soundtrack. This allowed the audience to hear the missing scenes exactly as they had been performed, while looking at still photographs taken during the filming of those same moments. At first, the effect feels strange. The picture stops moving, yet the voices continue. A living film suddenly becomes a memory. Then, something surprising happens. The method begins to work. The stills give the lost scenes a shape. The soundtrack gives them a pulse. The audience can follow the emotion even when the original footage is gone. The final restoration ran 176 minutes. That was 5 minutes shorter than the premiere version. One count said a full 7 minutes of actual film was still missing, though the exact number has never been settled with total certainty. Haver's team included Liz Bechtold-Blythe, Eric Durst, Craig Holst, and DJ Ziegler. Haver later wrote the major book on the entire story, A Star is Born, the making of the 1954 movie and its 1983 restoration. He also wrote about the restoration for American Film Magazine in its July and August 1983 issue. Because of him, a film that had been treated like a damaged relic began to breathe again. January 24, 1983. Before the public could see the restored version, the Academy held a special screening of the recovered footage at the Samuel Goldwyn Theater. One person needed to be in that room more than anyone else: George Cukor. He was 83 years old. For 28 years, he had refused to watch the version of A Star is Born that remained after the studio cut it down. This screening was different. It would show him the lost pieces that had finally been found. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, he was going to see part of his film return to him. Then the story delivered its cruelest turn. George Cukor died the night before the screening. That fact sounds too painful to be real, yet it is part of the record. The recovered footage was shown at the Goldwyn Theater on January 24, 1983. Cukor died the previous night. He never saw it. The timing feels almost impossible. Haver had searched through 1982. The footage had been found. The reels had been prepared. Cukor had agreed to come. This was the director of the Philadelphia Story, Gaslight, and My Fair Lady. This was the man who had spent 28 years unable to face the damaged version of the film that had been taken away from him. He came within 24 hours of seeing it restored. Judy Garland had already been gone for 13 years. She never saw it either. That is what makes the restoration of A Star is Born so heartbreaking. The project existed to repair an injustice done to 2 artists. Yet by the time the work was finally done, both of them were missing from the room. Everyone else got to watch the film come back. The 2 people who needed that moment most were gone. July 7, 1983. On July 7, 1983, the restored A Star is Born returned to the public at Radio City Music Hall. Nearly 6,000 seats waited for it. Think about that for a moment. In 1954, the studio had cut the film because people were worried it was too long. 29 years later, the restored version played at 176 minutes to a packed house in the largest cinema in America. The complete 4-track stereo soundtrack was heard as it had been recorded. The original color print was used. The recovered musical numbers were placed back into the film. As the movie played, the old judgment began to fall apart. For decades, people had known A Star is Born through a damaged version. That version felt uneven. It felt strange in places. It had gaps where emotion should have been. Critics often called Garland's performance brilliant, while treating the film around her as bloated and flawed. The restored version changed that view. Audiences could finally see what Cukor and Garland had actually made. The film was no longer just a comeback vehicle trapped inside a broken structure. It became clear that the missing scenes had carried meaning, rhythm, and emotional weight. The restored cut showed why Garland's performance had such force, and why the film's view of fame still felt so sharp. Since then, many have called it the greatest performance of her career. It has also been seen as one of Hollywood's finest films about fame and the machine that feeds on it. For almost 3 decades, people had judged Judy Garland's comeback through a version she never approved. Studio executives had cut the film without consulting her. They removed the 2 numbers that helped explain her character. They released a version that changed the shape of the story, then left her reputation tied to that damaged cut. The restoration revealed something bigger than missing footage. The film had always been stronger than people were allowed to know. After the 1983 return, the restored cut quickly reached home audiences through Warner Home Video on VHS. A Laserdisc followed in the late 80s. A DVD arrived in 2000. In 2006, a 2-disc special edition matched the expanded soundtrack album to the visuals. The work continued again in 2008, when Warner Brothers announced that its motion picture imaging facility would restore the film at 6K resolution. That version opened the first Turner Classic Movies Film Festival in 2010. The same year, it arrived on Blu-ray as a 2-disc deluxe edition. Ronald Haver did not live to see most of that later life. He died in 1993. Still, he left behind more than a restored film. He left behind a method, the technique he and Gene Allen created from necessity, placing an intact soundtrack over rephotographed stills to cover missing picture, became a model for repairing damaged films. It was later used on other titles, including Disney's Bedknobs and Broomsticks, which had suffered a very similar fate. A curator crawling through storage rooms in 1982 ended up creating one of the most useful tools in modern film restoration. That is the quiet power of his work. He did not just find lost pieces of A Star is Born, he changed the way lost pieces could be shown. The print that may still be out there. Now we arrive at the mystery fans have chased for more than 70 years. Somewhere, there may still be a complete 181-minute print of A Star is Born. The idea is not empty fantasy. Prints were sent to theaters before the recall. In 1954, recalls were imperfect. Reels could disappear. Exchanges could misplace material. Projectionists and collectors sometimes kept things they were supposed to return. The Haver recovery already proved the larger point. Some footage Warner Brothers believed had been destroyed was sitting in a private collection. Material thought to be gone had survived outside the studio. So the hope remains simple. A theater may have failed to send its print back. Stories like this have happened before. Lost films have appeared in foreign archives, private collections, old vaults, and boxes with the wrong titles. Reels of Metropolis surfaced in Buenos Aires in 2008. Nitrate film has even been found in a swimming pool in the Yukon. Haver himself found picture footage inside the Warner Brothers sound department in the wrong building, at the same studio that had supposedly destroyed the material. That is why people keep looking. Nothing has surfaced so far. The missing complete print did not appear in 1983, even with money, publicity, and a national appeal. It did not appear in 2008, when Warner Brothers restored the film again at 6K. It has not appeared since. The missing material is also specific. There is the When My Sugar Walks Down the Street number, which was cut the day after the premiere. There is the beach picnic. There are pieces of dialogue between Vicky and Norman that now exist only as voices over photographs. That is the remaining gap. 4 minutes, or 7, or 10, or 20. The number changes depending on which count a person trusts. The uncertainty itself feels like one final injury in a story already filled with them. Yet the real meaning of this search goes beyond missing footage. Judy Garland spent 4 years hearing that she was finished. Then she made the film of her life to prove she still belonged on the screen. At its premiere, critics praised it as one of the greatest one-woman shows in movie history. Within 5 weeks, the studio cut 27 minutes from it without telling the director. The removed material was destroyed or scattered. The shorter version earned less money than the version it replaced. After that, the Academy sent a camera crew into Garland's hospital room on Oscar night. When she lost by 6 votes, the cameras left. She died in 1969, believing the film existed only in the damaged form that had wounded her. 28 years later, Ronald Haver crawled through vaults and storage rooms until most of it came back. Then George Cukor died the night before he could see the recovered pieces. The picture survived. The 2 people most tied to its pain did not live long enough to see the world understand what had been taken from them. That is what fans have been hunting all this time. They are searching for more than 4 minutes of film. They are searching for the version of Judy Garland that the studio decided America did not have time to see.